Welcome everyone to the International Mentoring Community Mentoring Lounge. Yes, a time to get together to have a conversation about mentoring, all things mentoring. And today we're going to be taking a look at learning and educating as it connects with mentoring. And what we're going to do is take a look at 7 considerations about learning and mentoring and how they support mentoring and mentor and the mentee. And it will be a little bit of a conceptual dive into it. There will be some practice, but Doug and I both realize is that guess what? There's a lot of each consideration, a lot to each consideration, and we could dive just on a show in and of itself. So we're going to take a look at the 7 today, and then we'll take a look at them over the weeks and months ahead as we dive into this learning and educating connection, competition, considerations that go with mentoring. So those of you who don't know who I am Dr. Stephen Hobbs. I am the Director of Certification for the International Mentoring Community, and my co-host is...
I'm Doug Lawrence, and I'm the Director of Education and Outreach.
And Doug and I got together a number of years back to create the International Mentoring Community. And we were looking at, yes, advancing all things mentoring, but also to get to the point where what we could do is the certification of mentors. We saw that there wasn't something like that available. And Doug, in his own practice, had been playing around in that field for a little while. And when I reached out to him and offered what I had from a know-how perspective, we jumped on it, and here we are today. And we're going to take a look at that certification another day. I did a little bit last week, and so you could get a bit of a feel for that. So you might hear some dogs barking. There's some people coming into the house, so we'll just have to put up with it. It's just that part of having your studio in your house. So what we're going to do is just first have a connection with Doug. Doug had something special happen for him around something he contributed for the world. And Doug, we're talking about your book. What happened? Why don't you update us? Because we talked a little bit about that on our previous broadcast.
So on the 17th of January now was the official launch of You Are Not Alone. And the book has gone Amazon #1 bestseller, and
congratulations.
Yes, thank you. And it seems to have piqued the curiosity of a lot of people, because the book sales there's still people that are acquiring a copy of the book and obviously exploring it. And I actually had a person who obviously grabbed one of the Kindle versions early and was going through it, who sent me a message yesterday, I guess it was, and said that, my goodness, I certainly know a lot more about you as a person after reading this book. So just a word of caution to people: if you do decide to buy the book, you'll get inside me as an individual, and that could be good and that may not be.
Yeah, getting to know you. That's as far as I'll go.
Okay.
So the name of the book again is, for those who haven't heard the title?
You Are Not Alone.
And it's available through Amazon.com, Amazon.ca, and Amazon around the world, right?
Yeah.
So I would certainly encourage everyone to grab a copy. I know that when I read the earlier versions, it's a great introduction to mentoring, but also the connection between mentoring and mental health. So I recommend it highly to everyone. So anything else that you want to bring up at this point in time? We are a live show. I don't know if there's anything that you wanted to make an announcement about at this point.
No, I think that the book was the main thing, and let's get at her.
Let's get at her. Okay. Well, what we've got is, the title is 7 Considerations of Learning and Educating for a Mentoring Arrangement. And if I was to put a couple of adjectives in there, it would be wholehearted learning and extraordinary extraordinary mentoring. My apologies. Oh, no, sorry, it'd be extraordinary educating. There we go. So just to make sure, wholehearted learning and extraordinary educating. And what we're going to do from those 7 considerations is sort of dive into different elements of that title and explore what we've got working for us. And I know that Doug is going to be bringing a little bit more of the deeper practice again because of what he does. So I'll be taking a bit of lead here and looking at it. So you might get a little bit of an academic flavor from me. My doctorate was in adult education, human performance improvement, and therefore I dove around in the the theories and models and frameworks of adult learning and human performance, and I certainly have tapped into that. And I know Doug comes from a deep practice. He came out of the HR field, right, Doug?
Yep.
Succession planning, that world, organization, culture. So let's see where we go today. And what we're going to do is we're going to start off with is what is learning? And from that perspective, I think we could, as I said in the introduction, we could go diving into that, into deep areas. But what I'd like to do is just maybe look at learning in the sense of what it means to improve focus and strengthen the ways in which to gain concepts and practices and understanding character. So it's about gaining that understanding, gaining that comprehension to be able to value whatever it is that you are learning. And therefore, one of the great ways that I look at it goes back to, and I was trying to remember who wrote it. I think it came out of the workplace learning area, but it was the sense of learning is about the detection and correction of error. I always like that one because there is others who are talking about, it's the change that you seek to improve performance. There's other ways that look like that. And I always like that detection and correction of error because it was very simple. And it was just the error of being, what is it that, it didn't quite go the way I wanted it to. So I'm not going to use the word failure, right? Or not being successful. I'm just going, yeah, that didn't quite work the way I thought it would. There's a bit of an error there. What can I do to correct that? Because I detected it, I corrected it. So from a learning point of view. And so that's where I sort of came from. And there's another 2 phrases I'd like to bring up. And then I'm just going to have Doug, because of his practice, more about from a learning point of view. We'll talk about the connection between learning and mentoring a little bit later. But there's 2 phrases I'd like to bring forward. One is, when you listen, you learn. And that's something that it kicked in for me years and years and years ago, is that I remembered if I listen, I can learn a lot more because I've got 2 ears and 1 mouth, and I'm listening, I can learn. And what that brought forward was a very deep appreciation, all right, for who influences me or who influences you. Because if I'm listening, who am I listening to? What am I listening about? What are the concepts and practices and the character identifications am I listening to? And that just really got me thinking about something that goes like this, not all truth is in print, and not all of what is in print is truth. And I sort of went, hang on, okay, let's extend that to digital, the media, conversations, everything. And so I really started to pay attention to my learning approach. And that really got me going. And before I talk a little bit about learning approach, from a deep practice point of view, how did you come to know about learning, Doug? I'd be curious.
A large part of it was, well, a couple ways. The first was from the aspect of one of my mantras is Ken Blanchard, and I believe he's been quoted as saying, when you stop learning, you stop leading. So when you stop learning, you stop leading. So that was one of the things, and that's always been something that I've sort of kept in the back of my mind as I've been going through and exploring the concepts of a deep practice for mentoring and creating that deeper, richer mentoring experience and all of those things. But the other thing from a learning perspective is that part of what we try to do, certainly what I try to do, is to ignite the individual's ability to be able to creatively think their way through different situations. So using creative thinking and being able to do that. So those would be the two main ones that, certainly jump out for me at this stage.
Yeah, and as we pop into the world of educating, it's about the educating approach called mentoring, which allows that to take place. And I think that that's great. Just before we go into educating, I'd like to mention that there is this notion of the five senses, the five sensory ways of learning, and we visual, auditory, kinesthetic being the physical, actually getting in and doing things, and then there's the taste and smell. There's also the other elements of intuition they call now multisensory, and being able to pay attention to your learning and what's coming in, the physical sensation, if you wish, spiritual connections, soul connections, and listening to that. And I didn't want to go away thinking this is just totally mental, physical kind of idea. I wanted to get in the sense that there is this multi-sensory way of learning, and paying attention to that is really important moving forward. So I think the next area that we want to take a look at then is, what does this sense of wholeheartedness do? Wholehearted approach. I believe Brene Brown, Dr. Brene Brown, Dare to Lead, I think is one of her books, and she has been talking a lot about this notion of wholeheartedness, and it's bringing your whole heart, so your heart, head, and hands, but bringing your whole heart into your learning is important, and that wholeheartedness shows up in your approach to being extraordinary in your educating. So I think let's unpack educating. So what is educating? So as someone who is a mentor, I'm just going to ask you to reflect a little bit from your perspective, Doug. What does educating mean to you? What's happening? What's that process about? I'm putting Doug on the spot because I didn't want him to know that I was going to ask, so that he would go and write something down. What does educating mean to you, Doug?
I get, if I take a look at a mentoring arrangement, so somebody that I'm working with today, it's educating is about me using my lived experience to be able to help an individual deal with a situation that they're currently dealing with. So being able to find that relatable lived experience that I can share that with them, educate them on, here are some different approaches and techniques that you can use in order to be able to deal with that. And it kind of infuses their critical thinking skills to be able to work their way through different situations. And so by doing that, I'm actually applying those concepts that are very much from an education perspective.
Yeah, and as we get into connecting this learning and educating with mentoring, you'll appreciate what Doug is sharing here, and getting into it a little bit deeper. If I was to offer something up here, I'm going to go back to a couple of phrases I mentioned with learning, and I'm going to do it this way: is when you listen, you learn; where you share, you educate. All right. And if you're understanding who influences you from a learning perspective, then you influence who from an educating perspective. And therefore, they are tied together. And the next little piece, I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But just before I go there, I also know that educating is very much about involving and evolving whoever is the learner in making great decisions, ethical decisions, whatever the other adjectives you would want to make with that, because that educating is sort of leading the person, bringing something to them so that they can make some decisions. So in other words, okay, from the data and facts and data that is informing me, the information, then the educating is taking in, how do we then take that into the knowledge and wisdom so that you can make the decisions that are necessary. So I think you can probably get a flavor that learning and educating are quite entwined, all right? But there's also what we call 10 educating approaches, and we're going to go over a little bit more of those, mentoring being one of them, and we'll go over that. But I think what would help is, we've sort of alluded to it a bit, Doug, here, is that there is this notion of connection and competition and the considerations of learning and educating that one wants to pay attention to here. So the connection is that they do assist. If you're learning, there's some educating. If you're educating, there's some learning. They are connected. But guess what? There is a bit of a competition, and it sort of goes back to, right, well, if I'm learning and listening, and if I'm educating and sharing, which one am I doing? Because you're paying attention. And I think we often say is, with 2 ears, 1 mouth, but sometimes, you know what? You may have to really step into the mouth aspect of this and do the educating component of it. And therefore, there's considerations that go with it. And those considerations are, this notion of learning and educating is about living with clarity, living with humbleness, calmness, caring, forgiveness. These sort of character elements of learning and educating, I'm learning through those as I'm educating through those. All right. And I know that I'm keeping it kind of conceptual. Remember, I gave you that sort of package warning earlier, but I wanted to establish this component because it fits well as we move into the world of mentoring as one of the educating approaches. And then I'm going to unpack a little bit about 9 other educating approaches that I think are of value. But as we transition into mentoring, Doug, do you want to share with us what your definition is, the one that we tend to use with international mentoring community?
Sure. So mentoring is a two-way trusted relationship where both the mentor and mentee learn and grow together on a personal and professional basis.
Yeah, and I would add into that, it's the trusted, the structural relationship is to get that in.
Yeah.
And that's particularly important as we dive a little bit more into what this mentoring, mentor, mentee is about, and we'll go there. I also, from a short version of this, I would say that mentoring is about the mentee asking the mentor questions to get at this personal and professional component. I always like to add that in because I make that as a comparison to coaching, which is the coach tends to ask the coachee more questions, right? Because the coach is going after involvement. I believe the mentor is going after evolvement. And so I make that distinction at this point in time. And there is a point where the mentor is the educator. I think that sort of follows with what we've been talking about, mentee being the learner. But Doug and I have had many conversations about this. We know that those two flip as well, is when the mentor is actually learning something from the mentee, and the mentee is doing the educator approach, all right? And that becomes important as we take at this structural relationship, two-way component. Anything you want to add into what I've just shared there, Doug?
No, I think that, what we're looking at here is it's still the aspect of the function or the role of each. So And from that is, like you've mentioned, is the, just to reinforce that, is the fact that, the mentor is the educator, but also can be the learner as well. And I certainly think of a lot of different situations that I've been in where when I'm dealing with somebody with mental health challenges, I need to know that I need to be able to listen and hear and know when it's time for me to listen and hear, and when it's time for me to maybe suggest or offer guidance or advice. And I had to learn that along the way. And sometimes the learning can be sort of self-taught, but it can also be where somebody else will provide that learning or that educating for you.
Sometimes it can be a pie in the face. Whoops, I shouldn't have said that. Oh my goodness, what was I thinking at that point in time? Or you get the mentee looking at you with a sort of that little bit of a, huh, look, what just happened here? What did you just say? Right. So no, that's great. Well, the educating approaches that I've been sort of sharing or alluding to here, there is mentoring, and I believe that there's a complementary piece called facilitating. So often I talk about facilitative mentoring, and facilitating is about the drawing out of ideas. Then there's a couple of a mentor. You often hear coach. I already alluded to that. And with coach, sometimes you hear what's called the instructive coach. So the coach is asking questions, getting you involved, but sometimes they may have to instruct you in something to give you the why of why you're doing what you're doing. For others that sort of play themselves out is there is what I call the shifting. That's succession planning, which Doug is very much into. And how do you help people shift their thinking or their approach, their careers? Counseling when things might not quite go as well as you would like to. And that sort of leans into the mental health area that Doug is talking about and why he distinguishes between mentoring and counseling. There is that. There's also the notion of training to give the skill to get you into the skill that you need now versus instructing, which is understanding more of the why and figuring out ways in which to approach it. Then there's consulting because you have some expertise you want to share in. So those are 8 that I mentioned. The other 2 that I would share, and I believe that they're going to be building some momentum, right, in the world, and that is celebrant and weaver. So the celebrant in terms of celebrating the extraordinary experiences of life. And we can think of, for those who are adults, giving birth, getting married, the death, the transitioning component. But there are also the celebration, different what happens in the seasons of life, right? And seasons of a year, but seasons of a life in terms of the aging process, right? One of the areas that I look at the celebrate is certainly celebrating the person who's not an older, but an elder. And one of the things that I'm writing on at this point in time. The weaver being the 10th, and not to give up, there's a few others that I'll talk about, but the weaver about really getting community supported and getting in there and weaving these educating approaches, these learning approaches, and doing it in a community way and weaving the stories together. That's another one that's important. Now, people have challenged me many times. They say, well, what about advising? What about supporting? Other words like that. And I say, well, they're actually probably subsets of some of the other broad ones that I've used. So I'm not saying, cast in stone, these are the 10. What I'm sharing is that these are 10 that make sense, right? And it keeps it manageable, but there are others that you can borrow from and bring into the story of this learning and educating that's available to you. Anything you want to add about any of that in terms of those educating approaches, Doug? Because I know you make a great distinction between mentoring and counseling because of even what your book is about that we mentioned at the outset.
Well, yeah, it's what it basically boils down to is as a mentor, it's knowing where that line is and being able to make sure that you're able to recognize when you're starting to cross or even coming up to the line, and then where do I go from there? And I know that handing off to a professionally trained guidance, or not a guidance, but say a grief counselor or addictions or relationship or any of those, or somebody who is dealing with post-traumatic stress, that as a mentor, being able to recognize when I do need to hand off and be respectful of each of the different roles as they exist, social worker, psychiatrist, psychologist, all of those things. So it's being able to see that and being able to hand off when it's relevant and appropriate. And that's part of the learning and educating steps that you go through as a mentor, especially when you have the practice of mentoring. It's important that you understand and appreciate and respect those different modalities.
Yeah, so what we've done so far, all right, and we're going to link it to mentoring here, is that the first 5 considerations, first one was learning, second one was educating, the third one was that connection, competition, the how we consider them together, all right. The fourth one was as an educating approach, what does that mean, right? And the fifth one is what are all the other approaches that you can use while you're mentoring. But I always, I learned this from an appreciative inquiry video. And in that, the person went and was learning about a weaver, okay, the actual weaver in Scotland. And he says, what's so important about what you do? And she said, when you weave, you weave. And I went, hang on a minute. When I mentor, I mentor. When I facilitate, I facilitate. When I lead, I lead. When I manage, I manage. And knowing which one I'm doing, and if I am going to shift, right, to shift from weaving to crocheting, there's a significant shift. You might go, yeah, but mentoring, coaching, they're the same kind of stuff. No, I offer to you folks that they're not. And that's why we're going to be spending more time in other shows looking at some of these other approaches and going deeper into some. But the sixth consideration for today's call, presentation show, is around the mentoring arrangement, because it was the 7 learning and educating considerations for a mentoring arrangement. And Doug shared in his definition that we use at IMC, and we sort of supported it, the mentoring arrangement. And he used words like relationship, arrangement. Arrangement has a bit of the how flavor to it. The relationship has the who flavor to it. And they go hand in hand as well, like learning and educating. And I know that because if you take the 3 letters of how and rearrange them, you get who, right?
Yeah.
And it's I always remembered that as being a fun way to get in touch with that, right?
Right.
And so the how, the who, the why just switches out the O with a Y, right? A letter Y, which gives you a sort of, oh, hang on, they all do relate to one another.
Mm-hmm.
So when it gets to the mentoring arrangement, it's sort of like getting the how to the who with understanding the why of the how. Okay? Because the mentoring arrangement is how you're going to set it up, who you're setting it up with, who's the person who's sitting across from you, right? Or standing or walking, whatever it might be, so that you might understand why that how is important to that who. And I think that that's what the mentoring arrangement is about. And what the mentor is doing at the very beginning is to manage that arrangement. to manage that system of mentoring. Okay. And often at the very beginning is that the mentor has to lead the mentee to the mentorship, the why of that. But I think what's really important, and this is the importance of the two-way element in the definition that Doug shared. The two-way is this notion of mentor-mentee, arrangement, structure, right, and relationship connection. It's there and it's sort of formal, but guess what? In a long-term arrangement connection, those terms mentor and mentee tend to disappear because it's the mentor is an educator learner just as the mentee is an educator and learner. And after a while, it sort of becomes a more like a friendship and a ways of coming together. But the mentor, and this is one of the things from the international mentoring community, is don't lose sight of the fact that you were the mentor walking in. So if you're going to mentor your mentor until you decide that it's something else with the mentee, that's the point I'm trying to. When you weave, you weave. When you mentor, right? Even though this wonderful relationship starts to unfold. I've had mentor-mentee relationships, and they're still going today. But I wouldn't use mentor-mentee except in this explanation. We're friends. We tap into each other's learning and tap into each other's educating. So, any thoughts you want to share around that, Doug? Because you come from a really deep practice here. So,
well, and yeah, and I too, I have those individuals that I have this long-term, long-standing, we'll call it a mentoring relationship more than anything else. And it's more about being there for that person than it is much of anything else. So it's a matter of being able to say, oh gee, I'm going to give Doug a call because this happened, but I haven't talked to him in 6 months. I wonder, hopefully he'll be okay with that, that sort of thing. And it's being able to have that relationship or arrangement in place where both parties know that's okay to reach out at any time. And I do have that. I have one in particular that I periodically hear from them when something's come up in the workplace or in their personal life, and they just, as they describe it, I just need to talk my way through it, and you're the one that listens well.
Yeah. And therein is a gift.
Yes.
Right? The mentor sharing a gift, but a mentee can share the gift of, being a recipient as well.
Yeah.
And I like that word gift because it comes from the heart rather than give, which tends to come from the head. But it also links to where I'm looking at mentoring is with the story of legacy. When you decide to live from the legacy that you intend to leave. And I bring it out through that. And I'll be writing about that myself and adding to that world like Doug has done with his book. So that actually brings us to probably a great bridge segue into consideration number 7, is that the word continuous wholehearted learning, continuous extraordinary educating. This continues, right, as you move forward, and therefore you never stop. And I'm going to say never stop. Normally, I don't use a word like never because it's sort of what does that mean? But I'm going to approach it from the perspective of you are always and in always learning and educating, listening and sharing. And therefore, the word continuous linked to this is really important because continuous for me is formative, continuing to inform. And then there's times where you go into reflection to catch some of the summative, the summary elements. And I sort of, we've heard this many times in the past, right? Is this notion of continuous formative journey, right? This reflection summative is destination, as I call them. And these destinations are just for respite, taking a little bit of a break before you get back in there and you get going. And to walk on again. And that's seventh consideration about educating and learning is important, is continuous. And I've heard people, when I've chatted with them about certification, they go, well, why is there recertification? Well, if I've learned how to mentor and I know how to mentor and I'm mentoring, then I don't need recertification or anything. I just go on to do what I want to do. Right? I can't stop you or anything like that. But what I say to them is, can you continue to learn? You may not have gone into every situation where you now know how to deal with it. And all of a sudden, tomorrow, you might end up going, whoa, hang on a minute, I've entered somewhere I don't quite know how to deal with this. And maybe if I stayed in touch with what I can continue to learn and take those breaks to catch up to what I've learned, right? And maybe educate others about mentoring, then that fulfills the one requirement, which is you educate what you love to learn.
Mm-hmm.
Continuous learning, educating. Thoughts on that one, Doug?
Well, I think it depends on where you want to go with your mentoring practice. And if you want to continue to see it grow to be able to, explore other opportunities and stuff like that. So other opportunities as in different situations, you're going to have to continuously learn on how you're going to become a better mentor. And that's, to me, that's part of the extraordinary mentor, or in our case, the certificate of competence journey mentor, is you get to that level because of continuous learning practices. And like last night, for example, I was invited to participate in a panel discussion on bullying, and I had some learning I needed to do. I needed to make sure I was up to date on, the current statistics and where people are going, or where organizations are going with bullying and cyberbullying in particular. So it wasn't that, I know I am the know all be all for that sort of topic. I had to go and do some learning and educating of myself in order to be, to bring value to that panel discussion.
Yeah, because when you share, you educate. So going and learning and sharing, right? While it may have not been mentoring in the true sense, I bet in some ways there was a mentoring flavor because of who you are was happening for some of the people who were in that room or listening in on. Was it online or in a room?
No, it was a online. It was a podcast.
Yeah. Okay, podcast. All right. So yeah, so it's important to remember we're continuously learning, continuously educating, and understanding about both of them, and figuring out what the systems and processes are. Words ending in ing, all right, tend to be process systems related words, right? But it's interesting, learning and educating, you could put the in front of them and turn them into nouns, right? Well, the learning I got, the educating I got, right? And doing it that way. So there's one thing I'd like to share as we close off, and it's more of a thought experiment for people, okay? A lot of times the notion of learning is underneath this thing called education. So when we go for education, we learn about learning and educating. I believe, okay, and I'm going to step out from myself to you who are listening in. I believe that there is education and educating,
Mm-hmm.
and there's learnation and learning. I believe that we may want to look at them and then find out ways in which to bring them together. Now, I've had people say, well, why separate them, right? But I go back to, well, educating is the educating, right? Education, learning, learnation, right? It's sort of like when you educate, you educate. When you learn, you learn. When you weave, you weave, right? When you lead, you lead. I was bringing at it from that perspective. So folks, it's a thought experiment just to see if any of you want to weigh in and make comments. And that's a great way to remind you about subscribe and ring the bell, right? And comment, like, and share where you find this. There will be more notes that will accompany the video and the show more notes. And I know this is going out on a couple of YouTube channels and into Facebook, all right, into the International Mentoring Community Facebook. We certainly encourage you to join us. And I think as we close off, Doug, I just want to remind everyone, all right, and I'll be coming back to you for the last word, as you know I always do, okay, is that what we have to remember is that becoming a mentor is important, okay? And you want to take a look at that. And one of the great ways to take into consideration what it's about is to join us on the first and third Wednesdays at 10 a.m. Mountain to join us at the Mentoring Lounge. And you can bring your whatever you'd like to drink. Today I have water and some lemon, right, that I'm enjoying here. But yeah, join us, right, and see what's going on. And with that, Doug knows that I always ask for him to close out, all right? Because I get to do the introduction, Doug gets to do the close out. So Doug, what do you want to share with us today as we close out?
I think that the big thing today, and we've talked about this for those that are listening in, is the significance and importance of educating and learning to being able to provide that deeper, richer mentoring experience. And you won't get there if you don't continuously educate and learn not only others, but also yourself.
And with that, I think we would both say, join the international mentoring community. I think it would be one of your best decisions you've ever made.
Yep.
So with that, yeah. So with that, Doug, I'm going to close off and wish everyone who's watching and those who are listening in afterwards, have a great day. And when you mentor, you mentor.